What's up, people? My name is Shaggy, the Opinionated Hippie. Started the channel to devote it to all things Frank Zappa in sort of an effort to spread Frank Zappa's music and the love of Frank Zappa's music. I have since opened up Frank Zappa's concept of the big note to include as many things as possible. And so today I'm going to rank and review the albums from what was at one time one of my all-time favorite bands back in my college days. It is a band I still listen to somewhat regularly. And one of their albums, the one that is number one on this list, is probably in my top 10 most listened to albums of all time. And of course, as you know, it says right there, talking about Camper von Beethoven. This is a band that came out of California, the Redlands, oh no! And then ultimately Santa Cruz in like the mid to late 80s. They are best known for being the first band that David Lowery of Cracker was in. Not a big fan of Cracker. They have one great album, Forever. But I am a huge fan of this. But without a doubt, the similarity is David Lowery's voice, David Lowery's singing, David Lowery's sort of witty, clever, sardonic, intellectual, but simple lyrics. I think they're great lyrics, but he definitely, at least the Camper von Beethoven version of them, they're very college, alt, independent, with a healthy dose of sort of world music. They dip into like a lot of like Eastern European like folk songs. And then they employ that with like ska and some punk tendencies and some just witty pop. So they're really an eclectic, very eclectic late 80s, early 90s sort of like hodgepodge independent college band. And then in their three most recent albums, they've sort of delved a little into prog rock, into some more guitar exploitations, and their balladry has become really, really good. But they're a very eclectic band, and the one thing of these 8 albums, I don't think any of them are bad. Some of them are great. All of them have moments that are truly, truly interesting and engaging. But the Frank Zappa connection, before we jump into the 8, I think there's 4 connections. One, they have a song called Waka, so Waka Jawaka. Waka, spelled the same. They're both instrumentals. 2, and this, I probably should save this for last, but 2, this may be me misremembering, but Primus, back when I was going to college up in UC Berkeley, had a cover band called Caca, C-A-C-A, horrible name. And the members of Primus, I don't think it was all of them, but I think it was just Les, the drummer. I don't think Larry was in it. Who knows? I forget. And I saw them open for a bunch of different bands, also saw them by themselves, but I think I saw them open for Camper von Beethoven once. So a Zappa cover band opened for Camper von Beethoven. They also have a Grateful Dead. They used to cover Loser. Me and my really obnoxious, annoying friends would go and yell, "Eyes of the World," between songs. And after us doing that for several shows, they dropped a Loser on us once at the Warfield. We took credit for that. Probably was not because of us, but that was pretty cool. David Lowery singing Loser works perfectly. They also made an album with Eugene Chadbourne, who is, if you don't know who Eugene Chadbourne is, that is one of those deep dives that is like only Buckethead can compare to. Like, there is no way I could ever rank and review all Eugene Chadbourne albums. He's been doing this for decades. He's a DIY, mostly acoustic. He plays the rake, which is his electrified rake, and he picks the like tines on it to make music. Does a lot of like protest songs, a lot of really, really hardcore anti-religious stuff. So he shares that with Zappa. But Camper von Beethoven and Eugene Chadbourne made an album called Camper von Chadbourne, in which there's a pretty uninteresting Zappa medley on there. Plus, Camper von Beethoven has been known to cover Who Are the Brain Police. So there are connections. Those are them. And now, it's about the same 5 members in all bands. Different drummer early on, a different violin player for what could be their best album, but different guitar players when they tour live. Guy from Monks of Doom sometimes sits in with them, but they have pretty much the core 5 has been with them for most of their albums, with, you know, variety extra people coming in. But anyways, that's it. Enough pre-album review ranking yapping. I know a lot of people might not have heard of this band, but my point in doing this is to open ears and open eyes and hopefully get people to listen to this band, because I definitely think the top 3, maybe the top 4 albums are just still stand up over time, at least to these ears. But anyways, on to number 8. Number 8, New Roman Times. So the band made 5 albums in the 80s. I think 5 albums from 85 to 89. And then they took like a 15-year hiatus. Lowry went and joined Cracker, formed Cracker. Cracker had some pretty good success. They came back together in 2004 and released this. Their early sound very much had a lot of sort of Eastern European flavors in it. They would do like sort of ska songs with Eastern European melodies that very sort of witty lyrics that were more like talking about culture, kind of a hold steady for like a 80s college youth culture or skateboard culture or even like a underground punk scene culture, right? But this album is sort of their grown-up attempt to carry that sort of witticism into like a new post 9/11 era. This is supposedly a concept album, though I have to admit I've never followed the concept very deeply, about left versus right, red versus blue, just the way people are disagreeing in this sort of post 9/11 world. They kind of lean a little more into their rock instrumental guitar theatric tendencies a little more than normal. It's a long album. It's close to 70 minutes long, which I think hurts it. I think maybe you cut off another 22 to 25 minutes and you have a really, really strong 40-minute album here. But there's some things on here that definitely are very much in the Camper von Beethoven scheme. They sound like them. Their instrumentals still are pretty interesting and engaging, not their best sort of instrumental work. Their guitar player, Greg Lisher, I think is his name, is without a doubt a very good guitar player. He brings some very tasty licks to his solos. So that is that makes it interesting. Greg Lisher, I want to make sure his name's Lisher. Yeah, Greg Lisher. But for the most part, it's none of these songs really stand out or are really memorable, though there are some really good moments. Like early on, you get like some 51.7 White Fluffy Clouds, or kind of more leaning into your like aggressive prog rock type stuff. You have some quirky little things. That Gum You Like Is Back in Style. Good Camper von Beethoven kind of witty song. Towards the end of the song, you get some towards the end of the album, you get some more of that sort of simpler, ballady, more acoustic stuff, which I think works better than the heavier stuff on this album. Towards the very end of this album, you have like this 6-minute instrumental jam called Discotheque CVB, which is probably the highlight. It's a little all over the map, kind of instrumental, proggy, disco-y type thing. But for the most part, it's a good listen. I don't have any comment on the story, whether the concept works or not. I've never got into it that much. I was kind of half-heartedly went into this when it was released 15 years after their last one. But over time, I've grown to like it. Definitely not as good as the 2 that would follow. They've done 2 more since this. But it has its moments. And I think if you're already into Camper von Beethoven, I would check this out because I think there are some highlights. But it's definitely not a good place to start. But it's my number 8 album, New Roman Times. Number 7, El Camino Real. This came out in 2014. It's their most recent album, so 8 years ago when I'm making this video. They did their album previous to this was La Costa Perdida, The Lost Coast, and that album kind of centered around Northern California. They came out of Santa Cruz after they formed in Redlands, oh no, which is in Southern California, and this is their sort of Southern California album, El Camino Real, though El Camino Real runs up the coast. But anyways, this is definitely, I think, better, a little more focused than the previous album that's on this list, than New Roman Times. Definitely still a little bit of a gap between the quality on this and La Costa Perdida. I really like La Costa Perdida. I don't think this one is just as strong of songwriting. It's definitely a little more balanced as far as they're like mixing sort of slightly up-tempo numbers with like their more somber, dark, ballady, not necessarily ballad, but slower tempo stuff, which I think they lean into very well on this album. You got a little bit of a little Eastern European flavor on a couple of the sort of melodies that come in with the guitar. You got very specific references to Southern California. You have Dockweiler Beach there in Los Angeles. I Live in LA, which is maybe the best, just breeziest song on here. I live in LA, come visit sometime. We'll have a good time. It's just a really nice, breezy LA feeling song. City of Industry. Darken Your Door is a pretty little kind of a somber, but that's David Lowery does this sort of somber kind of heartbroken, sad vibe really, really well. Again, his lyrics they're literal. A lot of storytelling goes on. They're very in a very Southern California. There's a lot of references to LA in here, which, as someone who grew up in California, both LA and Northern and Southern, I appreciate it. So it's a great California album. It is not as good as La Costa Perdida, which sort of praises Northern California better, and Northern California, I would argue, is a much better place than Southern California. So the albums themselves bear out which of those two is the better version of California. Two states. Two states. But anyways, yeah, it's a solid album. I think it's much better than New Roman Times. Not much better, but it's definitely more consistent. It's shorter than New Roman Times, which helps. It's more consistent from song to song. Pretty diverse in the landscapes. You're not getting the same thing over and over. You're getting all the little different flavors that Camper von Beethoven brings. Just not as strong songwriting as I would argue the rest of the 6 on this list are. But anyways, number 7, El Camino Real. Number 6, La Costa Perdida. This came out in 2013. Wow, back-to-back years for those. Early 2013, January. And this is the second of their sort of new era albums after their 15-year hiatus. This is the last one that features Chris Pedersen on drums. I think he's only on one track, and then I think they have a different drummer for the final album. But this is their tribute to Northern California. Come Down the Coast, opening song, this nice breezy, feels like a beach song. Lowery's calling out the names of like 12 different women he wants to come down the coast and join him there. You got songs like Too High for the Lovin'. Lovins are very San Francisco, Northern California thing. This is definitely that 1-2 punch of the openings, great 1-2 punch opening tracks. But Come Down the Coast is your typical sort of mid-tempo, breezy, kind of ballady, but a thing Camper von Beethoven does really well. Followed by Too High for the Lovin', which is your surrealistic. We're harkening back to like the original lyrics from those 5 albums, which were kind of trippy and surreal and very psychedelic. This is very much a psychedelic psych song, bunch of weird musical changes. The lyrics are about how I was too high for the lovin'. I woke up in the drive-in. There was a bird in my kitchen. It was going to attack me. Flying ambulance, bring me the anti-venom and make me a sandwich. Just these really strange, perfectly off-kilter David Lowery lyrics over some pretty interesting kind of alt-prog rock type, weird type musical changes. There's a lot of sort of jammy prog rock elements on here without really delving into like guitar solos and stuff like that. Just sort of weird musical changes that kind of, I think, suit the mood of the album really, really well, considering that it's a Northern California based album. Peaches in the Summertime sounds as delicious as you think that song would. Northern California Girls is a really nice, just Peaches in the Summertime, a little upbeat type of like shuffle type, fun type number. Northern California Girls, I think, is the centerpiece of this album. Apparently Lowery was living in Texas at one point. They're like, come back to California, come back from Texas, come back from Brooklyn. Apparently he's living other places. They want him to come back to Northern California. It is a great wanting to go back to Northern California type song. Yeah, you just got some really good music on here. You got some good lyrics. Lowery's voice hasn't particularly aged well, so I could see how on all of these 3 new albums, Lowery's voice could be an issue if you don't like the way Lowery sounds. There's a couple songs on El Camino Real where he just kind of misses notes completely. Here, his voice is not great, but it's got character. It's definitely has an aged quality that on things like Northern California Girls, I think works. On the opening, Come Down the Coast, works. But it's a good album. It's short. It's like 43 minutes. Kind of not a wasted note. You got a good balance of weird psych rock music. Not like, yeah, like weird psych, but in a very college independent rock alt way. Got a couple, maybe 1 Eastern European flavors. You got some upbeat fun numbers. Yeah, you're a little bit all over the map here. Still not as good as you get with those original 5 albums. I'm not going near Tusk. They covered Fleetwood Mac's Tusk in its entirety. I've left that off this list for obvious reasons. It's a cover album. But anyways, yeah. So I definitely better than I think the one that preceded it and the one that followed it. Definitely the highlight of their sort of new Renaissance, the Renaissance age of them in the 2000s, but definitely not as good as the five that they originally made in the 80s. But yeah, number six, La Costa Perdida. Number five is two and three, because of course it is, because two and three add up to five. This was their second and third album. No, this was their second album. Came out I think in 1986. Right. And this is definitely more of the same vein as their first album, but just not quite as strong songwriting or as catchy melodies. And what it is it's sort of just an eclectic mix of really strange instrumentals with like Eastern European melodies, folk melodies, some Middle Eastern folk melodies, and these really short kind of punk pop, irreverent, satirical, clever, sardonic type songs. With a couple actual serious songs thrown in there. Sad Lover's Waltz is a serious type, a little slow type ballad. Again, just the instrumentation. One thing that I think I failed to mention through all these is they have a violin player, either Jonathan Siegel in most of their albums. One album, Morgan Fichter, I think is her name. I'll correct that when I get to that album. On violin. And so that violin is very much a defining part of their sound. It carries melodies, does a lot of like the work of like what a guitar would do. The way they balance sort of the guitar playing and the violin, the arrangements are always pretty interesting. So you have a lot of that on this album, instrumentals that feature like sort of, acoustic instruments, some violin playing, some non-traditional Western melodies, with these short little kind of 2 minute, just in your face pop songs. Cowboys from Hollywood, Don't You Go to Goleta, Baby, don't you go to Goleta, which has these clever lyrics that kind of comment on youth culture. We're a Bad Trip, the phenomenal No More BS, which closes out the album. You get titles like ZZ Top Goes to Egypt. You have a cover of Sonic Youth's I Love Her All the Time, kind of showing off your sort of underground pop noise sort of, influence from them. So it's a solid album. It really captures their early sound well, but I don't think the songwriting is as strong and consistent as it is on their first album, nor is it as varied and all over the map as it would be on their third album. But still a really strong entry, and not really many bands kind of sound like this at all. I think the longest song on here is like 4 minutes, and that's the sad lover's waltz. Everything else is like 2 minutes, maybe 2.5 minutes of just hit you over the head with these really good, strong instrumentals or some clever lyrics, or yeah. So anyways, yeah, number five, a really weird, eclectic indie album for 1986. Definitely nothing else like this, but number five out of their catalog, 2 and 3. Number four, their third album, the self-titled Camper von Beethoven. This is by far their most eclectic, eccentric, all over the map outing, in which you have like songs played backwards, backward masking. You have a weird, I think it's a backwards version of Stairway to Heaven or something. You get a lot of Led Zeppelin references, a couple Led Zeppelin references on here. I think David Lowery's lyrics are probably the star of the show here. You have like very like sort of typical folk acoustic songs. Like it opens up with a song called Good Guys and Bad Guys, dun, just very simple like chords, but then the lyrics are there are good guys and bad guys, there are crooks and criminals. If they heard this song in Russia, they wouldn't understand the song anyway. Let's get high when the radio's on. Let's sit around and play this song, something like that. I have to sing the whole thing. I'm really bad with lyrics. But it's just kind of clever, kind of witty, kind of similar, self-referential, tongue-in-cheek inside jokes. You get Joe Stalin's Cadillac, which has an amazing Led Zeppelin reference in there. One of my favorite lines, you can't go left in General Pinochet's Cadillac. You have We Saw Jerry's Daughter, this amazing little, very upbeat, sort of happy, we saw Jerry's daughter, apparently about Garcia, that goes into this monstrous, just noise jam called Surprise Truck. It's not the ice cream truck. No, it's not. It's the surprise truck. Surprise. And it just ends with all this noise. The History of Utah is a kind of stream of consciousness sort of retelling of Joseph Smith and the history of Utah and Mormons, with all these sort of acronyms thrown in and like non sequiturs, and just great lyrical storytelling by Lowry with really good upbeat, like just kind of indie rock music. Still Wishing to Course, a fun poppy song. We get We Love You into Hoe Yourself Down. We Love You is sort of like, they're both sort of like banjo type backseat. The Devil Went Down to Georgia type one. We Love You tells the story of that Hoe Yourself Down is just a straight up like jam. Peace and Love is this weird psych, like this kind of slower, creepier story with like this really convoluted story of like a woman who gives birth a couple days after getting pregnant, and it's just really weird lyrics. The only thing on here that kind of doesn't work for me, that I kind of wish wasn't on here, and there's a couple EPs. There's an EP that they released at the same time that has songs that sound like they might have been recorded at the same time but weren't put on the album. But there's like a 7.5-minute version of Interstellar Overdrive, which is pretty good and has its moments, but I just don't need it on every album. And then the awesome album closer, Shut Us Down, da-na-na-na, just this 1.5-minute, just great pop song to end it. But yeah, this is an all over the map album. Some of it works, some of the backward masking stuff at first, you're kind of like, okay, that was pointless. But over time, I think from start to finish, this entire collection of songs works really, really well. Even like the weird oddities that are thrown in it. Unfortunately, I looked at this up on streaming, and all the streaming versions available have like either the B-sides or the EP tracks like put in the middle, and all this extra stuff inserted in there, which completely ruins the flow of the album. So if you are going to check this album out and you're going to do it streaming, track down the original set list and then listen to it in that order, because all that other stuff is a distraction that I don't think works. But yeah, really solid, fun album. Number 4, Camper von Beethoven. And this came out also in 1986. Anachronism. I think I said acronism. I meant to say anachronism, obviously. Number 3, Telephone Free Landslide Victory. This was their first album. This is a perfect balance of instrumentals with a lot of sort of Eastern European melodies. You even have titles like Vladivostok. What else? Mao reminisces about his days in southern China, not necessarily Eastern European there. Balalika Gap. Yankee Go Home, Yanqui. Paid Vacation, Greece. So yeah, you get a lot of references to like folk music from other cultures, and they incorporate that into like ska music and a little bit of like sort of modern sort of ska, essentially. But you also balance that out with some really, really clever pop songs, essentially. This album is where Take the Skinheads Bowling comes from. If you know the song, Take the Skinheads Bowling, Take Them Bowling, that kind of sums up the attitude of a lot of Lowry's lyrics. Funny commentaries on something like the idea of taking skinheads bowling, obviously. It's a funny image. So that's, I think, a lot of like sort of the lyrical currency that Lowry sort of deals with. But you get The Day That Lassie Went to the Moon, kind of self-explanatory. Get a cover of Black Flag's Wasted. Where the Hell Is Bill? It's a great song. Then it's a list of things Bill might be doing, like maybe he went to see the Circle Jerks. Maybe he's Mod Scott dancing. Kind of cool things like that. And then the closing, the 2 closing songs, Opie Rides Again, which is reference to Andy Griffith, a very nice instrumental that goes into like Club Med Sucks, which is kind of a punky, like Club Med sucks, authority sucks, I don't want to play lacrosse, just this kind of angry thing with these long drawn out like verses in which he's complaining about having to go to Club Med with his parents. Very teen angst song, but then again also exposing sort of the hypocrisy of the upper class kind of, or the problems of the upper class. So funny on its surface, but there's some levels there. And then the absolutely beautiful Ambiguity song, which is performed backwards on their third album, the one I just reviewed. But yeah, it's just a really, again, not nobody else was doing stuff like this, especially this came out in 85. We're talking Eastern European melodies, a lot of instrumentals, a lot of sort of eclectic instruments, fun, punky, pop, punky, folky songs that are just kind of, you know, whether they're satirical or whether they're sardonic or whether they're whatever it is, there definitely is a weird edge to them that might be seen as college humor clever, but I think over time has kind of paid off just because the music underneath him is so good that it's not like a one joke thing like, oh, take the Skinheads bowling. Yeah, that's the joke. But the music is so good, and the music is undeniably just really good, sort of eclectic folk pop, rock, whatever this is. So yeah, really good album. Yeah, excellent debut album. Like and the great thing is, like, while the second album kind of retreads some of the same area as this one, the third album is definitely way more eclectic. And then by the fourth album, I think they've definitely matured and become a whole different album. And then the fourth and fifth albums, which are still on this list and are going to come next, they've reached sort of Lowry and company have reached peak form. But this is a solid, strong album. If you don't know them, it's definitely a good place to check them out. Because if you like this album, I can't see why you would have complaints with any of the other, at least of the first four. But anyways, number 3, Telephone Free, which was supposed to be Tree, but apparently somebody wrote it weird. Landslide Victory. Number 2, Our Beloved Revolutionary Sweetheart. This came out in 1988. This is a near perfect album. It has a little more mainstream. The production, I think, is up a little bit more than on their previous albums. Has a couple just straight up really good kind of psych rock instrumentals. They're only like 2.5 minutes each, but they're quick. They're to the point. One of them is Waka. The other one is Aya Fatima Part 2. It opens up with Aya Fatima Part 1, which is this great, just really good example of Lowry's lyrics. And there's a lot of lyrics on here, which you definitely, this is true with a lot of their songs. They generally don't have a verse, chorus structure. Like the Aya Fatima lyrics, it's one long story. It's about, what I always thought it was about being in a motel room somewhere like, say, Wyoming, because they mentioned Wyoming in the song, taking psychedelic drugs, and then all sorts of things that happen to your brain while you're stuck in a motel room in Wyoming on psychedelic drugs. Something which, if you followed the Dead in the late 80s, early 90s, or even the 70s, you might have experienced, and thus you relate to the song incredibly well and love it. But it's just got great energy. It's got some great guitar work. The way Lisher and the violin kind of complement each other, the runs that the guitar player does are phenomenal. The bass work by Victor Krummacher, I hate to say his name wrong, Krummacher, sorry. Bass for all of these is amazing. He is, I think, him and Lowry are the only two people that have literally been on every single album they've done. And so the bass is phenomenal, but you get a really good mix of like kind of instrumental or mostly instrumental rock songs. Aya Fatima Part 1 and 2. Waka is a really good one. You get some really good kind of slower, more ballad kind of feel-good numbers. One of These Days has a really good just pop riff. Do 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 do. Never Go Back has a really good sort of fa reggae ska type feel to it. And then you get these incredible sets of lyrics. She Divines Water, which is like a folk psych song that just trails off into these weird lyrics. Tanya, apparently it's about a TV news anchor in Northern California and just seeing her on TV. And you get my absolutely favorite lyrics. The closing song, Life is Grand, which is a little bit of a slower type ballady thing. But the opening lyrics to Life is Grand are, and life is grand, and I will say this at the risk of falling from favor with those of you who have appointed yourselves to expect us to say something darker. Just that run-on sentence of like, hey, we're going to say life is grand, even though our entire career has been us just doing a bunch of sort of like like dark, sardonic, cynical, like tongue in cheek, but commenting on society, but not participating in society type lyrics. So it's nice that they're addressing that for what is a beautiful closing song. I'm getting a whole bunch of text messages from my wife right now, so I'll have to see what's up with that. But anyways, she is at work. I'm not. I'm a teacher. She's a nanny. Nannies work more in the summer. Sucks for her. So anyways, yeah. So great album, great songs. Oh, also as a Grace Slick reference, so that essentially is another Zappa connection. And the song Turquoise Jewelry, which was kind of, I think, a college radio hit. Maybe it might even been in like an XM radio. I think I heard that on XM radio a couple times back in the, not when it came out, but like decades later. But it's got that da 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 da. Take off your turquoise jewelry, you look like Grace Slick. Take off that jumpsuit, you look like Grace Slick. But yeah, eclectic musically, a little all over the map, definitely more mainstream than the earlier stuff, but definitely doesn't really sound like anybody else out there. You get a cover of the traditional song of Death, great songs in Turquoise Jewelry, which is an upbeat number, the instrumental Waka. Yeah, just all over the place, but in the best way possible. Not a bad song on here. First side, a little bit, second side's a little bit weaker than the first side. I think a stronger second side might have elevated this to number one, but it's still a really good album. So yeah, number two, Our Beloved Revolutionary Sweetheart. And number one, Key Lime Pie. This came out in 1989. It is the only one that does not feature, I think, Jay Siegel, their sort of all-purpose instrumentalist, or Jonathan Siegel. I said Jay Siegel because I was thinking of Jay Bennett, the guy from Wilco who left after Yankee Hotel Foxtrot. So Morgan Fichter is on here for a couple tracks. I know she then toured with them on this tour. But this is by far their most mature album. I think it's their, until the more recent era, their best sounding album. Definitely their little more like politically focused album. You get a little more left-wing politics kind of seep into this, but not in a very hit your head over the, not in a hit you over the head type of way. Probably I've listened to this album. It is in my top 10 of all time albums listened to. When it first came out, we focused on the song Flowers and listened to that over and over and over again, because when I was in my freshman year in college, the year before this album came out, my roommate and then I started to steal plastic flowers from our cafeteria, our dorm room cafeteria, and we would stick them in the ceiling because you could make holes in the ceiling. So by November, we had like a garden of plastic flowers in our ceiling. That was pretty cool. We eventually got caught, had to pay a fine, and had to give all the flowers back. But when this came out, we loved the song Flowers because it's pretty much just like flowers growing on the, and they just name a bunch of places that flowers are growing. Great little like kind of a psych pop song, very kind of dark, obviously, interesting, not obviously, but kind of dark for a song about flowers, but at the same time joyful. And then my roommate and I, after we got over Flowers, started listening to two songs on here, Jack Ruby, the second song, and Sweethearts, the third song, over and over and over to try to figure out what they were about, because remember, this is pre-internet. Jack Ruby obviously was about Jack Ruby, who assassinated Lee Harvey Oswald, who assassinated JFK. So kind of trying to figure out what the commentary on that, very driving, just da-na-na-na-na, just with some amazing slide guitar work throughout the song. Not really a solo as much as just slide guitar through the entire thing. And then Sweethearts, possibly their best song ever. We'll find out when we do that video. Amazing guitar work, just this like finger pick dude, electric guitar type main theme. It's about Ronald Reagan's like younger days before he became a politician. It's got some very interesting references. Like I actually went to the bookstore and found a book about Ronald Reagan because they mentioned Dixon, because he's back in Dixon, always back in Dixon. And then I had to find out that he went to Dixon High School. So apparently it was about him as a younger kid. But anyways, some very interesting sort of thoughts about Ronald Reagan. Of course, this comes out at the tail end of his presidency. So not going to get into politics there. So we focused on that song for a long time, and we used to listen to that over and over again just to like figure out those lyrics, figure out what they're trying to say. And then years later, about 4 or 5 years later, I was on Fish tour with a friend of mine, Little E, Billy Graham, not the preacher, mind you, but we would listen to a song called All Her Favorite Fruit over and over and over again and rewind it and listen to it. I had the green key lime pie cassette of this album. And that started, 94 was when it started. We were leaving the West Virginia 94 Fish Show, the one where they did Gamehenge, and we were heading east. I think the next show was in North Carolina, and we were in this horrible thunderstorm. The radio was talking about tornadoes, so we turned off the radio and we listened to this album, Side B. And when we got to All Her Favorite Fruit, for some reason we just wanted to hear it again. So we listened to it like 10, 12 times that night, and then over and over again on that tour. Then on the 95 tour, that was kind of our favorite song we listened to over and over again. But yeah, it's just a great album. Starts off with an opening theme, kind of an instrumental, a little bit slower, a little more somber than their upbeat stuff, but sets the mood, I think, for this album really well. Jack Ruby, this straight up in your face aggressive rocker about Jack Ruby. Sweetheart's a beautiful song. When I Win the Lottery, David Lowery's lyrics at their best. Little leftward leaning politics in here possibly, but nothing too bad. I Was Born in a Laundromat, another just great straight rocker. Borderline, a nice poppy ska song. Light from a Cake closes out side one. Side two opens up with June, which has this nice sort of composed psych meltdown at the end that is just really has some very interesting instrumentation and goes some weird places. All Her Favorite Fruit, phenomenal song. Interlude, instrumental interlude, The Amazing Flowers, The Humid Press of Days, a cover of Status Quo's Pictures of Matchstick Man, which was a pretty big hit, at least on college radio, and then Come on Darkness. Going back, closing out with a ballad about darkness. So yeah, it's a perfect album, man. I just don't think there's anything wrong with this album. It sounds great. The lyrics are great. The instrumentations are great. Side two is a little more somber than side one, but I think it works well. And easily one of the top 10 most listened to albums of my life. But yeah, I highly recommend you check this album out. Number one, Key Lime Pie. That is it for Camper von Beethoven. They have a couple EPs which are pretty good. Vampire Can Mating Oven has a couple really good songs on it. 7 Days in particular Seven Languages. 7 Days is the Dylan song. 7 Languages is a really good song that's worth checking out. But yeah, really good album. Really good band. Again, Lowery Left Informed Cracker. Not a big Cracker fan. I never was. But I do think the album Forever is a really good Cracker album. That's the only one that I kind of ever listened to. But anyways, I do have thoughts on those one day. Who knows? But anyways, thanks for watching. If you check this band out, let me know what you think of them. I'm interested to see people coming new to them with fresh ears. If I'm like completely off base, if there's something here, because this is a band I so loved in my college years that maybe I have arrested development. I don't know. But yeah, thank you for watching. Subscribe, comment, like, share, and let me know if you have experience with this band or if you check them out, what you think of them. Thanks for watching. Until next time, peace, y'all.